Good morning. I'm Scotty Peck,
And I'm Shannon Peck.
and we are so delighted that you're with us today for this peace session number 6 on forgiveness. This is such a powerful one, and I want to just show you the screen for a second, and we're looking at the peace guide right here, and you can see where we are. We're still trying to help people move past the story. And as you get their feelings out, you listen with compassion, you express unconditional positive regard, and you manage to be a loving and detached observer and use loving speech, what happens is that people begin to open up to forgiveness. Small little openings, but stop sharing. Okay, but that's what happens. So when those little openings for forgiveness occur, as a peace master, you want to be ready to go in there and help those occur, whether it's within yourself or you're helping somebody else.
So we hope that as we're moving through this peace session here today, that you'll allow your heart to open, you'll allow things to come up that perhaps you've buried, that maybe you need to look at in a safe environment, and start freeing yourself from the burden, because there's a lot of burden and pain when we don't forgive. So who is forgiveness for? I know our group already knows the answer. It's for you, of course. We ask ourselves, well, why should I forgive the person who hurt me? They don't deserve to be forgiven. But of course, it's not for them. They probably even moved on. They might not even remember what happened. But forgiveness is for the is for you, not the other person so much. So you're the one living with the pain and the hurt inside of you. So you're the one who suffers when you're hurt, afraid, resentful. This is your own suffering. And so we need to find a way to move past these sufferings and traumas, in fact. No matter what happened, it takes courage to forgive. It takes a lot of courage. You have the courage necessary. You might have to call it in from your reserves, but you have the courage necessary. So Scotty wants to read from Jim Paulsky.
We have this book, and it's called Forgiveness by Jim Paulsky, and it is a fabulous book. Of course, I have the benefit of Shannon's always reading 3 billion books a day, it seems, and I kind of am the recipient of the joy that she gets from reading them and all the discussions we have. So this is one that is, I want to read you some things. Here are the top reasons why we don't forgive. It's kind of interesting. And the first reason, that the person really hurt you or hurt someone else. They deserve your anger, your withdrawal of love, and any other punishment they get. So, good reason not to forgive. Another reason not to forgive, don't be a fool. If you forgive, that person is just going to do the same damn thing all over again, right? So
we're going to cover that.
Why forgive? And third, another reason not to forgive, because you are weak if you forgive. And another reason, if you forgive that person, it is the same as making them right and you wrong. Interesting arguments, aren't they? And only a person with really low self-esteem would even consider forgiving that person. I think that's funny. It's interesting, as a peace master, you, whether you're forgiving yourself, forgiving within yourself, or helping somebody else forgive, this is the stuff that you know, that this is what you're up against. When you don't forgive, it is like controlling the other person. Control is the ego's best way to keep safe. And the best way to keep a distance between you and the person who hurt you is to never forgive them. These are pretty powerful, aren't they?
They are. It's pretty typical. You're probably familiar. These probably strike some notes with you.
I got 4 more reasons not to forgive. 1, hold back your forgiveness since it is a way to feel good, knowing it is a good way to get your revenge. Yeah. Another, if you forgive someone, they might think you agree with what they did or didn't do. That's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about all of this. If push comes to shove, you should forgive the person only if they offer you a sincere apology, and then only sort of forgive. That's a good one. And the last one, let's face it, it's always the other person's fault, so why forgive? This is what goes on in the thinking, and why forgiveness is so difficult, and why, as a peace master, you're recognizing that people stay stuck in their story. Because if you are not willing to forgive yourself, and if someone else is not willing to forgive, you are stuck in that story. And your role in being here with us today and thinking of yourself as a peace master is to help people get unstuck. Help yourself get unstuck. That's exciting. So all these things we're talking about are things that, oh, yeah, I need to know why people don't forgive.
Yeah. So what is it costing you not to forgive? What is it costing you? Because it's a big price on it. It costs you with a hardness of heart, even a closed heart, an ongoing deep-set anger, or hate, resentment, bitterness, being occupied by this emotionally where you aren't potentially available for new joyful experiences. And physically, there's things that go on in your body when you're not forgiving. The breath gets shallow and stifled. The stomach gets tight. The defensive posture, there is a defensive posture. Stress around your eyes and on your complexion, withholding from your heart. So unhealed, repressed anger can create physical pain, tumors, and even disease. So not forgiving carries a very high price on it. And when we don't face our need to forgive, we bury it, we repress it. What happens is that we carry around our wound as an anger or a fear. It becomes a shield. We become defensive. You live defensively, thinking that this will protect you, as though your anger and hurt will protect you. They won't. They won't. And not only will anger and hurt and fear not protect you, they will actually rob you from living in emotional freedom. Think about it. What is that like? Emotional freedom. And living in fluid joy, where you can laugh easily, where you're smiling inside and outside. So I was thinking about road rage and how it really doesn't begin on the road. You know that the person that gets out of the car or bumps the other car or fights on the road about some incident, it didn't start there. It's something that the other person, the aggressive people or person, never cleared. It's something that it screams for forgiveness. It really does. So repressed anger or seething becomes defensive, and it shows up the moment that the person on the road feels like they've been slighted. It's a perception. I've been slighted. How dare they treat me like that? I'm going to show them. And you just, it builds in anger. We know what anger is. It's just so aggressive. It just fills us. So,
and that raises the issue that all of these peace skills we've been doing of listening with compassion, being loving and detached, lowers the anger so that the other person or yourself can begin to explore life after anger.
Yeah.
And life after anger is going to bring up the possibility of forgiveness.
So anger, if it's been displaced from the original incident, it might show up on the road raging with a total stranger. If the person practiced, and you're going to hear me say this 2 or 3 times, if they practiced patience, compassion, and understanding, it wouldn't happen. The road rage would not happen. So anger costs. And anger is not a shield at all. It can't protect you. In fact, it murders. Anger murders. It makes people think about killing each other or not stopping in time before something catastrophic happens to someone. So we want to put a lot of awareness around our anger, whether it's repressed or if it's coming up. And I have a huge story to share with you later on. So I want to talk a little bit more about anger because...
Hopefully it's not about being angry at me.
Oh, we'll see. Here's the thing. If you feel angry, what's behind it is you've been hurt. Hurt leads to anger. That's why you're angry. You're not an angry person. You've been hurt. That's all. And the hurt has not been addressed and it hasn't been cleared. And that's what forgiveness is for. And that's what we're talking about today. So your hurt is the real problem. And we resist. Once we've been hurt, we tend to resist feeling what's in our heart. We no longer come from a heart center. We don't feel safe. And the hurt transforms itself into anger. But once you realize this, you can strip away the anger and deal with the real issue, the real problem, which is hurt. And hurt feels like a loss. It feels like a loss. We feel hurt. We've lost something valuable. It might make us mad. It might just stay with, hurt and go into depression. So how can you deal with your hurt? I think one of the most powerful practices for loving ourselves is the practice of empathy. And, when you start empathizing with yourself and showing yourself kind attention and softness of the heart and understanding that you're precious and basically you're very innocent. You are innocent. Hey, we all make mistakes. This is the human experience. It's okay. It's okay. You can cut yourself some slack. You can give yourself the benefit of the doubt. You didn't mean to get hurt. I think it's really important to feel your hurt deeply. Hurt runs very deep. There's a lot of layers. And allow yourself to just sit with the hurt. That's what I do. I just sit with it like, wow, I really feel hurt. Feel its sadness. Just feel that and feel its regretfulness.
And as you sit with somebody else as a peace master who's feeling the hurt, you can see that you can't rush them into forgiveness.
Yeah.
Like, now it's time to forgive.
Yeah.
Because
don't
that's not
that.
going to work. It's hard because you're, as a peace master, you are a couple steps ahead of the other person because you know what needs to happen. But it's very important to let the energy has to come from them. But this is also why you stay detached, because if you start getting involved, like, that's just terrible, that should have never happened, then you become part of the problem and you no longer are the energy that opens up the door to forgiveness.
That's
you actually are
yeah.
You are actually telling them their emotions are fine, just keep going in that direction.
So how can you, Scotty, cancel a present or past hurt by using forgiveness?
Well, I can think of an example.
Okay.
Shannon was married for 18 years to somebody that was, it wasn't a good relationship. But I didn't know her husband until after we got married. He sued Shannon. And we ended up spending the first 2 years of our marriage in court against his suit. So as you can imagine, I wasn't very fond of this gentleman. And he also put out a contract on our lives. So I was very protective, obviously, of Shannon. And it turns out that the lawsuit, he was defeated and that went away. But during this whole time, there's no one else that I had wished so much evil on in my life than this person. And it was very difficult for me to even entertain thoughts of forgiveness because I was so angry at the way he had treated Shannon. So interestingly enough, the person who was in a better posture of forgiveness was Shannon, who shouldn't have been in my estimation, but that's because I was stuck in the story that I just can't forgive this guy.
This is very unfortunate, but most of the people who knew him wished he was dead. I knew him for 18 years. People hated him even after that. People hated him. It's really sad. And the way I avoided hating him is I constantly practiced forgiving. I constantly practiced forgiving and understanding so that I would go back to thinking of how he was as a little child, innocent. He wasn't born like that. He had some really awful experiences as a child, and it turned into being very hateful at times, many times, actually. His relationships were very poor. So, and I knew at the time that we were going through this court case and he was trying to put me in jail. It was all absurd, but he just kept creating these lies and we had to keep addressing them. And finally it all came to an end and the judge said, this is ridiculous that it ever even came up. But so it took a great deal of time and effort. And I just used that time to forgive, and to think one day this will be over and it will be whatever it is. And I won't live with hatred in my heart towards that man or towards anyone because I won't live with hate. And I knew that he would be in my consciousness, my memory for the rest of my life, maybe for all eternity, I don't know. And I wanted to be the one who determined how he would show up in my consciousness, in my memory. So I took charge of that. That became the thing, more important than winning at the court or getting it over with or anything else. I wanted to make sure this was clean in my consciousness because I didn't want to live with bitterness and hatred and resentment and, all of that for the rest of my life. The whole thing was totally unfair to me. But, this stuff happens in life.
So what happened in our experience was Shannon was really the peace master on this issue, this huge issue, and her influence of being in that energy as a peace master of forgiveness enabled me to move towards that direction. Here was a good example where she didn't support my non-forgiving. As a peace master, she just kept explaining the benefits of what she was going through and how it helped. So, and you said something about seeing him as a young child. I am pretty convinced that if there's somebody who you can't forgive because of something they did to you, if we could go back and see a short movie of their entire life from the very beginning of when they were born as an innocent child, as you said, we would see what led to the actions that they took, and we would probably have immense compassion for them. So this is something that I try to remember as a peace master, because we can't go back and see that video, but we can know that if we did, we would have enormous compassion. And that's very helpful to me as a posture, as a peace master, to know you take everybody on this planet and look at their lives from the beginning and just watch it as an observer, and we would have compassion for that person's present actions. Doesn't mean we'd agree with them, but we would have compassion.
This is really how you get into forgiveness. You can, it is a process, and really those 2 years of the court and the lawsuit and him spreading big, huge lies, total lies about me to people we knew and in the business. It was agonizing. I did not feel like a peace master at that time. I struggled. I suffered. I cried. I prayed. I woke up in the middle of the night all the time. I didn't really sleep a lot those 2 years. It was very fearful and worrisome for me to experience all that, to be accused of something I never did. And I didn't feel like a peace master, but I set my course towards inner peace. I set my course towards forgiveness. I set my course to be the determiner more than his harsh actions and ridiculous accusations. I wanted to determine the outcome of how I would hold him in my heart and for the rest of my life. And I succeeded.
No, it raises
And you know how I succeeded? How I know I succeeded? Because I found evidence that when people would say, I wish he'd be dead, or, the lawyers, I'm sure even his lawyers, but I would find myself thinking, poor guy, golly, what a mess he's created. I would find myself doing that. I go, wow, I must be softening and not and holding him like a mother would hold the child, a mother's forgiveness. And so I checked myself. This is really important when we're trying to forgive someone, to watch ourselves in the process. How are we holding them? Are we still labeling them as the one who hurt me, the one who really, created so much sorrow and suffering for us? Or are we able to release some of this labeling and some of this inner story that we tell ourselves about the people who hurt us?
And there's a whole nother issue. We talked about reframing. Even though this was the issue for the first 2 years of our marriage, that we were under attack by him legally, there was another issue. It's like, well, even though that's not a good way to start a marriage, what about our marriage? What was that like during those first 2 years? Because the lack of forgiveness and anger and all that could have just swept away our marriage in a wave of bitterness. But what happened is that we got closer and closer. We drew into our spirituality. We worked on forgiveness, and we created the happiest 2 years or as equally happy in our marriage as any other time, even in the midst of what is a terrible crisis that looked like it was unsolvable. So had we not been in that position, it would have not just been a toll on us individually. It would have been we might not be married today.
Yeah, we really unified. We didn't divide at all. We unified. And that's really important. So sometimes when I need to forgive someone, I'll spend some time recalling what happened. What happened? Why am I so angry at this person? What was it they said? What is it they did? Or I said or did? Or, I'll allow myself to face it entirely, like it just happened. And all the ugly, and all that I regret of my own behavior, perhaps. And I'll allow myself to feel how badly it hurt me. Just sit in it. Not out of self-pity, but sit in it to learn and realize how deep the hurt goes. The hurt calls for empathy. It really does. Until it receives empathy, we can't let it go. So sitting with it allows us to be with it in a way that's kind and honest and very revealing. Something will come around where you'll start to realize things a little differently. I try to learn something fresh from it if I can. Is there something I could have said or done that would have prevented it? I'm not looking for blame here. I'm just investigating. Or was I clearly the victim of being in the wrong place at the wrong time when somebody road raged on me, and thought I was some enemy or something? And I specifically asked myself, what is it that person said or did that I most hate and that I feel most hurt me? I want to sit with that. What was the moment that it all triggered something of tremendous loss and hurt for me? And then I'll ask, well, why did they say that? Why do you suppose? Was it when I said blah, 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 then they said that? Well, why would that create such a big problem? Or did I actually do something wrong? I want to face everything. This is a time of immense honesty. If you're going to clear it, you got to face it. You got to be honest. So if I think I did something wrong in my own eyes, I look at it squarely and I think of what I could have done or wish I had done, or like maybe rehearse, what could I have said? What do I wish I really would have said? The hero Shannon, if she were in good form, what would she have said? And kind of play it out as though that would be a happy ending. And, I'll learn from next time. This time is teaching me for next time how I can train myself to be more heroic, to be the love master that I want to be. And realize that there's something really big at stake here. If I don't forgive this person, I'll be stuck in a position of hate and resentment or hurt probably for the rest of my life. And that's what was at stake with my ex-husband. It was critical that that be cleared. It's critical that you clear whoever is tripping you up, whatever their actions were that tripped you up in that incident or those incidences that turned you against them, that made you feel so harshly towards them and close your heart so tight, that hurt you so deeply. It's critical that you look at that and clear it. It really is. This is about your health, your happiness, your joy, your freedom, your peace. It's critical. So, since forgiveness comes often in layers, it's a process, whenever it comes up again, I'll look at it again. It's like, is there something else here I need to peel back to learn about myself or them? And often there will be, especially with the big hurts of our lives.
So I think it's important to just state for the 20 billionth time in this course that creating peace is a process. It's not an event. There isn't like, oh, today at 3 p.m. I forgave. It's like you may have to do this 1,000 times. Forgiveness is part of the peace process, and it itself is a process.
So learning from the incident, learning about yourself, learning about the situation, learning about the person is imperative. It is so essential to the forgiveness process, you can't leave it out. So if you can write down, here's what I learned about myself from that incident, and also fill that in, and then fill in the statement, here's what I learned about the other person that I can tell you honestly has caused me to come to greater peace today. Then in that way, that's like a solemn oath and promise you make yourself, because if you've learned about yourself and about them, you most likely will catch it when it repeats. When it comes through another person, that same kind of trigger, that same kind of hurt, that same pattern, you'll catch it and you'll stop it. And that way, really, that's the only way I know where you can permanently open your heart again, is if you know that you have learned the wisdom of that lesson so that you can prevent it from happening again. And that's really important. And I'm going to tell you, that's where most people really mess up. They really mess up because, well, let me just bring up the question. Do you let that person back into your life? That's the big question. And unless you can say to yourself that I can prevent it from ever happening again, and I can make sure I'm not with a person who I can't prevent it with, that person doesn't belong in your life. Unless that person is going to change their behavior and stop doing what you have explained creates harm to you, that person doesn't belong in your life. And many of us were not trained as children to stand up for ourselves. And so we didn't get a voice about that. We never spoke, from the throat chakra. But this is a time where you'll need to find your voice. You'll need to stand up. You'll need to speak up. And you'll need to take a very strong stand. If someone has harmed you deeply and you feel that they are capable of repeating that and you're incapable of preventing it, that person is toxic to you. And you can't afford to have someone or many people like that in your life ever again. So you might think that's a loss. That's not a loss. What's a loss is if you continue down the same road of repeating being offended and hurt and living in anger and closed heart and all of that. That's a loss. That's a loss. But we get very attached to our relationships.
We do. And close by our home, we've been involved with an organization that supports women who have been abused. And one of the terrible statistics is that abused women go back to the abuser time after time after time. It's very hard to take a stand to remove themselves from that person.
Well, that might be the extreme example where there's family violence. But I'm really talking to you about even the far less extreme example of where you've just been put down so darn much. You've just been taken advantage of. You have served the selfishness of this other person, and they have insulted you. They have been rude to you. They have yelled at you. Oh, my God. I mean, it'd be a lot easier to rid yourself of that person and then start the forgiveness process than it would be in the middle as it continues to occur and you continue to be injured and insulted and wounded. So, really important. Okay, I have really skipped around on these notes. I got to look at this a second, see where the heck I am. All right. So in the forgiveness process, it means that you want to come to a point where you can actually start letting it go. You can start releasing the hurt, the anger, the resentment, the bitterness, the defensiveness. It's a wall. It's a big black wall. It really is. And it's holding back your life and the love that you deserve to have and to experience in your life. If you're so caught up in being defensive and you're afraid you're going to be hurt again, do you really think someone's going to walk into your life and you're going to be available to them to be loved and to love them? I'd say it's unlikely. I really would say it's unlikely. So it's critical that this be cleared. It really is. And you can do it. Gosh, I've seen so many, and we're going to discuss some of these things that have been cleared through forgiveness. So you want to start somewhere. And why don't you share the cornfield?
Yeah, this is this.
Is that backwards?
No, it looks backwards to us, but it's not to them.
Why don't you share the name of the book and who wrote it?
I will. Oh, that's a good idea for those. It's The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness, and Peace by Jack Kornfield, Kornfield.
Kornfield is one of my favorite authors. I've read all of his books.
He also wrote a book called A Path with Heart. So
lots of books.
As a peace master, we're trying to understand the other person, to get past the story. So he says here, we have all been blinded. We have all suffered. And Pema Chodron tells this story. A young woman wrote about finding herself in a small town in the Middle East, surrounded by people jeering, yelling, and threatening to throw stones at her and her friends because they were Americans. Of course, she was terrified, and what happened to her is important. Suddenly, she identified with every person throughout history who had ever been scorned and hated. It's a lot of people. She understood what it was like to be despised for any reason: ethnic group, racial background, sexual preference, gender. Something cracked wide open, and she stood in the shoes of millions of oppressed people and saw with a new perspective. She even understood her shared humanity with those who hated her. This sense of deep connection, of belonging to the same family, is the awakening of the great heart of compassion. The first time I read this, I thought to myself, So how did the story end? Because I'm like, well, what was the conclusion? But that
is the story.
That is the story. And as a peace master, what's happening is that you're helping people come to a higher understanding of who they are, who the other person is, and the possibilities. So all of this, remember how the very first peace skill was envisioning peace, that you don't need anybody else to do it. It just happens within you. Here she was envisioning peace and identifying. So I think
it really shows, this is such a powerful example. It really shows how in the middle of being harmed, your perception can go outside of that place of harm and see a bigger picture. And I imagine it saved her. I think that's very powerful. And I love it that it was like she was connecting with humanity. And this is what happens when we hate, or we're bitter, or we're afraid and we're resentful. We're disconnecting. We're not connecting at all. I think the biggest harm to us is when we disconnect. That is a loss. When we can open up all parts of ourselves to others in the world, we begin to connect with each other, and ultimately, that's all we want. We want to connect with each other and not disconnect.
I like to share a brief story about this. When I was in the Army 3,000 years ago, I was stationed in Korea. Korea's in the news today. And one of the things that bothered me so much was the way the American troops had a disdain for the local people in many cases. And it just it was hard for me to forgive that. And I was actually working it turns out I ended up being a reporter for the Stars and Stripes, so I was able to write stories on anything I wanted while I was stationed in Korea. And so there was a friend of mine who was a Korean soldier, so I told his life story from the perspective of what it was like to be here with Americans who treated him, his country, like a second-class citizen. And it was interesting because here I was, it was something that was hard for me to forgive, but I was operating as a peace master to help clarify, well, what is the issue here? This isn't right. And he and I became the closest of friends for life. And it was interesting for me to see from his perspective how much forgiveness there was in his heart, which helped me. But there's always going to be something big like that to forgive, and many ways to look at it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about for a moment what forgiveness does not mean. It certainly does not mean that you condone what was done to you unfairly. It doesn't make you weak or vulnerable. It doesn't mean that you're going to let your guard down and it's going to be repeated. You're not going to let that happen. It just means that there's work in examining what happened, facing it, sitting with it, the feelings. There are a lot of big feelings and incidences where we've been treated unfairly. We've been caught in the middle of something. And as mentioned before, it doesn't mean that you continue necessarily to relate to that person, that they continue to be in your life in some kind of relationship. It doesn't mean that at all. So.
Yeah, and I think it's scary because you think if you extricate this person from your life, you think your life's going to be empty. But the truth is your life's going to have the potential now to have the love that you deserve, the relationships that you deserve.
So I think I'm going to go to my forgiveness story, and then we'll come back.
Sure.
To where we are. So I want to be sure that I share this with you. I spent a lot of time on it in my whole life, really, and sharing it and preparing so I could share it with you today. This is an example of forgiveness with my brother, and it's a really old wound that I had. Growing up, there were just the two of us in the household with mom and dad, and he was always mad at me. I loved him. He was always mad at me. He was just kind of angry. He treated me dismissively. He'd yell at me. He'd put me down. And I loved my brother. I looked up to him. He was older. I thought the world of him. And when I was about 8 years old, he was in one of his terrorist moods. And I was standing in the living room, and he walked past me, and he stopped. And with all of his might, with his fist, and he was a strong young 10-year-old, he shoved his fist into my stomach as hard and with as much force as he possibly could. I gasped for air. I bent over. I thought I was dying. I thought I was dying. I literally thought, I'm dying. It was terrifying. And my dad came home, and he spanked my brother for it. And my brother never did that again. He used to hit me a lot, and he never hit me after that. But it didn't stop him, even though he wasn't being spanked, from speaking hatefully and mean to me a lot. But as we grew into teenagers, he was nicer to me. And we even became friends, though rather distant. And I just knew I didn't ever want to set him off because he had a temper. So many years went by, even decades. And from the day of that incident happening, I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't referred to it. I didn't even remember it. I put it away. I repressed it. And I was lying on the couch, and this was decades later, and we were married. And this incident, I started to recall that incident as though it had just happened. It was a trauma that bubbled up and surfaced. And when I realized what my brother had done to me on that day when I was so young, for the first time ever, I felt my feelings about it. And I felt enraged, absolutely enraged that he would do that to me. Here it was all these years later. I'd never felt that feeling of rage. The trauma had just sat there. And as I reviewed the incident, I thought, my God, he almost killed me. And I told Scott, blow by blow, what had happened that day. He couldn't believe it. And at that moment, he may have intended to kill me. It felt like a death blow. It really did. And do you know that actually Houdini died from the same act? Someone came up to him out of the blue. He was unprepared, and they socked him in the stomach as hard as they possibly could. He died. So I felt the full weight of his hatred in that moment of his hit. And I did something that I regret. And that's what I want to share with you today, because I'm learning all the time. I wrote him an email. I cried. I talked to Scott. I decided I've got to tell him. He owes me an apology. So he still had a bad temper. I wrote him an email. He wrote back swiftly. He was very defensive. He called me names. It's typical of me to act like that. We went back and forth a few times with rage by email. Really bad idea. And then we came to a standstill of not talking. And so then it was Christmas time, and Scott and I had planned to go back to Christmas with my family. And he lived back there. It's 1,400 miles away. I usually didn't have to see him. But at Christmas, we were going to be under the same roof a lot. And with mom and dad and the whole family gathering, I didn't know. I thought, well, I guess I'll just ignore him. I can't stand him. I'm not going to talk to him. He owed me an apology. So I dreaded seeing him. I'm sure he felt the same way about me. And when we got to the family, back to Arkansas, no one knew except his wife and Scott and myself that my brother and I had had this big rift. And the first day I felt very defensive. I'd catch him looking at me, or I'd look at him, and I'd just get my mind off of it. But something was welling within me, and the rage was turning into an overwhelming grief. I felt so incredibly sad that here was my brother of all these years. We'd been connected in the best we knew how. And here we were in such a split, such a rift, not even speaking to each other. And it was Christmas, it was family gathering. And we were trying to hide it so no one else would be affected by it. It was awful. The whole thing was just awful. By the next day, I felt so deeply grieved and he was very defensive. I decided to break the silence, and I went over to him and I asked him, will you please meet me in your old bedroom? And he looked at me like, I don't want to. And I said, please. He said, all right. I said, I'm going there now. So, I didn't know if he'd show. And he was very reluctant. And he was probably afraid. It had been awful. So we stood there facing each other, and he was waiting to see what I wanted to say to him. He had that look. And words came out. I'd been praying. I didn't know what to say, but the words just spilled out of me. I'm sorry. And he said, me too. And he said, you forgive me? Is that what it means? And I said, yes. And he said, you mean we can just do that? And I said, yes. And he grabbed me and hugged me so tight. He was so relieved. The relief in his face was matched by the relief in my heart. I was so relieved that I could just forgive him and skip over the necessity to jump through my hoops of, apologizing or whatever. I just wanted to be close to him again. I just wanted to love him. I just wanted to connect. That's all I wanted. The pain of being separated like that was just awful. So we hugged. And though we were close again in our hearts, and we had made a truce, we never really talked a lot after that. But when we did, it was okay. We were okay with each other. And then on his 50th wedding anniversary, I flew in as a big surprise, mainly for my sister-in-law, but my brother too. I wanted to surprise them and wish them in person a happy 50th wedding anniversary. They had had the happiest marriage I'd ever known, other than Scotty and myself. So on that day, after I surprised them and everything and giggled and laughed and hugged everybody to pieces, my brother and I were in the kitchen, and we were standing face to face to each other, and he looked at me and he said, I love you. I love you, sis. He said, I didn't know I'd ever see you again. And I said, I never knew I would see you again. It was a surprise to me that I came here today, but it was important. And I made the effort, and I wanted to see you and Pam and give you my love and tell you that I love you. So I was so relieved that we had made peace and that we could say that and speak from our hearts freely and openly and mean it. That meant so much to me, because that was the last thing I ever said to him. And it's the last thing he ever said to me. Within a few months, he died suddenly. Within 5 months, he was dead. And there would be no more opportunity to say, I love you, or I'm sorry, by the way, I wish I'd never said that, or by the way, I'm so sorry we lost all these years. No more time. It was over. And I look back on my relief and gratitude that we cleared it that Christmas Day. We cleared it, and with the intention clearly that we must. It was just too important not to. So, even after his death, I needed to forgive myself for my wrongdoing to my brother in order to clear it completely. I needed to be at peace because I really wish I had never written that email to him. There's such a better way, and I've thought it through of what I wish I had done. Let me come back to this. Skipping all around here. Well, let me just share that the Dalai Lama was asked, he was interviewed by John Oliver. It was a great interview. And John Oliver asked him a really pertinent question, which perked up my interest a great deal. And he asked him, how can you possibly forgive the Chinese for the infractions, for the bloodshed of your family, your friends, your monastery, your brothers? How could you ever forgive them for that? And he said, and of course with the Buddhist, everything's a practice. He said, oh, I practice compassion. I practice
patience.
Patience is the number one thing. I practice patience, I practice compassion, and I practice understanding. And so if I had stopped to do that day when I decided to march myself to the email in a raged, state, if I had waited and said, wait, just wait, be patient, Shannon, be patient. What can I learn from this? Review it again. How did that happen? What was it going on within this tortured child? He was a tortured child. Why would he commit such an act so grievous against me? I would have come into great understanding and great compassion, which I've done since. And I think I figured it all out. I won't go into it, but I think I know why he did that. And my heart goes out to him. He had a very different life than myself, a very different life. And everyone deserves compassion and understanding. And if I had stopped and been patient instead of lashing out with aggressive anger. See, anger robs us of patience. Either you have patience or you have anger. You don't have both at the same time. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's a good story because it shows you as a peace master, this is the depth of emotion that you're living with that keeps you stuck in the story. That story was decades long.
Yeah.
And it also shows the logical nature of forgiveness. The solution, what we hope will be the solution, is the other person will apologize. And here I'm going to write them an email so that they can finally apologize.
Yeah,
well. But the healing, when you were there with him and you said, I'm sorry, and he said, I'm sorry, and he says, can that be it? So it was the forgiveness within Shannon's heart that enabled things to move towards peace. That's what it was. And so this is so interesting to know. I think it's just powerful to know that you don't need the other person's involvement to create peace, to create forgiveness. Now, and that's why when you're helping someone else move through their story, you don't have to go get a conference call with the person that aggrieved them to get them part of the dialogue as well. It can happen within. And if it's obvious that the other person can't reform or won't reform, then the peace process is helping you or the other person remove that person from your life. So you're free of that burden. Yeah, this is very significant. Think we should share these things?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, this is from this same book, The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness and Peace by Jack Kornfield. And there's a couple things that I think are it's just packed with things. But Viktor Frankl, who I'm sure you have heard of, says here, even in the worst situations, the heart can be free. We who lived in the concentration camps can remember those who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from us, but the last of human freedoms, the freedom to choose our spirit in any circumstance. And that's what you as a peace master are grounded in, that understanding that you can have, and the person that you're with can have any consciousness that they want. Just want to read these other few lines. Here's what the Bhagavad in the
Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, it says, if you want to see the heroic, look at those who can love in return for hatred. If you want to see the brave, look for those who can forgive. And the Buddha
it takes courage.
The Buddha is reported to have said this. This is amazing. If it were not possible to free the heart from entanglement in greed, hate, and fear, I would not teach you to do so. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And Jack Kornfield says, remember the transforming power of forgiveness, and that no matter where you are or what you face within your heart, peace is possible. That's the big story as a peace master, just to know that truth, that peace is possible. You don't have to know how, just know that it's possible. And the last quote, it takes courage to forgive the unforgivable and to release your heart from the clutches of another's terrible acts.
Takes great courage. So I think we'll end on a blessing. And I'd like to offer a blessing to ourselves, to the situation that harmed you, and to the other person that harmed you, that you perceive harmed you. May you be well, happy, and at peace. May you be well, happy, and at peace. May you be well, happy, and at peace. God bless.